Alright, so today I want to introduce you to the Super Phantom ball python. The Super Phantom consists of 2 copies of the codominant Phantom gene. As a matter of fact, the Phantom is actually in the blue-eyed leucistic complex, but if you actually make the Super Phantom, it's not an all-white snake with blue eyes, which is kind of interesting. If you actually took the Phantom and you bred it with the lesser, you would get an all-white snake with blue eyes, but you don't always get the all-white snake when you're breeding Phantom with some of the other genes. And kind of the interesting thing is there's a lot of combinations that look really close to the Super Phantom as far as the visual appearance, but when you start mixing other genes into the mix, you actually see some dramatic differences between those snakes, working other genes into the kind of the Super Phantom lookalikes. So today I want to jump over the internet and I want to show you the potential of the Super Phantom ball python. Alright, so I'm going to jump over here on Morphmarket.com and I want to start with a Phantom ball python, just one copy of the gene, and this is what a Phantom looks like. As a matter of fact, the Phantom looks really close in appearance to the Mojave, but I'd say the Phantom usually is a little bit darker as far as the background, maybe a little bit brighter as far as some of the color coming out on the top of the snake here. And you can actually see kind of these keyhole patterns right in the side of the Phantom. Looks really similar to the Mojave, and some of these genes you can actually line them up side by side and they look really close as far as the visual appearance, but when you start mixing them into other combinations, you get completely different visual effects. So for example, if you actually took 2 Mojaves and you bred them together, you would get an all-white snake with bright blue eyes, the Super Mojave. And if you actually take 2 Phantoms and breed them together, 25% of the time, this is what you get. You get a Super Phantom. Take a look at this crazy snake. That is pretty amazing. And I really love these purplish colored snakes. There's quite a few that have a really similar visual appearance to this, and it's kind of interesting. This is actually considered to be a blue-eyed leucistic. A lot of people will actually list this as a BEL, although it's not really an all-white snake with blue eyes, which most people consider to be a blue-eyed leucistic. As a matter of fact, I actually pulled up a couple other snakes that are really close in appearance. So this is the Super Phantom. We can actually compare that to this one. Looks really close to the Super Phantom. This is actually the Mystic Potion with a combination of the Mystic and the Mojave genes, and they're both in the blue-eyed leucistic, and they come together to kind of form like a purplish snake like this. As a matter of fact, all the genes in the blue-eyed leucistic are allelic. So if you actually took a Mystic Potion and you bred it to something else, half the offspring would come out as Mystic, half would come out as Mojave. You couldn't reproduce the snake, and you wouldn't get any normals. You can actually reproduce it if you actually bred it to something that contained Mystic or Mojave, but if you bred it to a normal, you really couldn't reproduce it. And here's another one. Take a look at this one. This one looks really close. This is a Purple Passion. They look almost all identical from one to the other. It's kind of crazy. As a matter of fact, if you look at the genes on this one, this actually contains the Phantom and it contains the Mojave. So you have one copy of the Phantom, one copy of the Mojave. And let me tell you, when you start mixing other genes into some of these combinations, you can get completely different visual effects from one to the other, depending on what genes are in the mix. So I kind of wanted to show you some of these other genes we can mix into the Super Phantom. And the first one I wanted to show you is the Black Pastel. And take a look at this. This is, I'd say this is one version of the Black Pastel. The Black Pastel can be really variable from one to the other. And some of them kind of have like a reddish brown color. And I'd say this is probably your more typical Black Pastel with a really dark background and kind of this almost like a coppery gold color as far as the color, the kind of the highlights of the snake. And kind of the interesting thing is the Black Pastel is also allelic with cinnamon. So you can actually take the Black Pastel, breed it to the cinnamon, and you get an 8-ball, which is a completely black patternless snake, which is pretty awesome. So here's what happens if you take the Black Pastel and you work it into the Super Phantom. Take a look at this crazy snake. That is one of the most craziest snakes that I've ever seen. It's almost like half dark and half light. It like can't make up its mind if it wants to be a dark gene or a dark combination or a light combination. As a matter of fact, I was kind of interested in the price on this one. This one's pretty crazy. This one actually sold for $500 and it was actually born in 2019, sold in late 2019. Kind of a crazy combination. So here is the Pastel. The Pastel, I'd say, is probably the #1 most common gene in all of ball pythons. That you actually come over here, over to Morphmarket, and there's like tens of thousands of Pastel combinations. I'd say it's probably the #1 gene by a factor of 3 compared to the next most common gene. It's really pretty widespread. And the Pastel really brings in a lot of the yellow color and really reduces the pattern. A lot of times, it really depends on the version of Pastel. Sometimes they can be brighter yellow, and sometimes they can be browned out, and sometimes they can reduce the pattern, and sometimes it doesn't really reduce it very much at all. But here's what happens if you work Pastel into the Super Phantom. Take a look at this crazy snake. This is, as a matter of fact, I was actually looking at this snake. It almost looks like it kind of has almost like a hue of green or something to it. It's probably the greenest ball python that I've ever seen. I don't think I've ever seen a green ball python. I guess this is probably the closest that I've ever seen with the Pastel and the Super Phantom. As a matter of fact, you can actually take 2 copies of the Pastel and work it into the Super Phantom. Take a look at this. With 2 copies of the Pastel, you actually fade out the Super Phantom. A lot of times, if you have 2 copies of the Super Pastel, a lot of times you'll actually get a lot of fading of the background. Sometimes you get kind of some highlighting here and there throughout the snake. Kind of, you can almost see it, almost looks like almost like paradoxing with little highlights that are kind of brighter in certain spots of the snake. And I'd say that's probably from the Super Pastel. So here is the spider. The spider is a pretty awesome gene. Essentially, the spider gets its name from kind of the spider web pattern coming right down the top of the snake. And I'd say most spiders are really super bright gold. And a lot of them actually have almost like a pseudo calico, some white coming up the sides. I'd say this is probably a pretty low white spider. I've actually seen some with really stark white coming up the belly. And here's what happens if you work spider into the Super Phantom. Take a look at this. This is pretty amazing. As a matter of fact, if someone handed me this snake, I'd be like, what is that? It's kind of amazing that the spider is, you almost can't even see the spider pattern on this snake. It kind of completely eliminates all the spider webbing. And keep in mind, this is actually, technically it's a blue-eyed leucistic, so it's really difficult for other genes to actually break through a blue-eyed leucistic. As a matter of fact, if you actually had a Super Mojave, which is the all-white snake with blue eyes, most of the times when you work other genes into a Super Mojave, none of the genes will really break through. So this is like a blue-eyed leucistic where you can kind of see some genes breaking through, and sometimes when they do break through, it's not really the expected visual appearance that you would normally expect. And normally you'd actually see a really strong spider pattern. As a matter of fact, if you go back to the spider and take a look at the head, usually the head of a spider has a really crazy head stamp. And if you actually look at the spider Super Phantom, it almost completely eliminates the head stamp, which I thought was kind of an interesting feature. So take a look at this. This is actually the spider with the addition of Pastel. So essentially what this is a Bumblebee Super Phantom. Pretty amazing combination. It's amazing what one copy of the Pastel can do to the spider to completely transform it and really give it more of a high contrast kind of an appearance. As a matter of fact, I actually pulled up, I was kind of arranging these in just kind of random order, and I was looking at this one, and then the next one I pulled up, I wanted to show you the Coral Glow mixed in with the Super Phantom. And as a matter of fact, that last one looks almost exactly like a Coral Glow. Look at this. This is the Super Phantom Bumblebee. It looks almost like a Coral Glow, although it's a whole bunch of genes, and then the Coral Glow is just one single gene. So if you actually take the Coral Glow and you breed it to something else, half the offspring come out as Coral Glow. And kind of the interesting thing about the Coral Glow is it's typically really visually dominant. So you mix the Coral Glow into just about anything, and usually the Coral Glow is really dominant in the visual appearance, and you can definitely tell there's Coral Glow in the mix. So here's what happens if you take Coral Glow and you work it into a Super Phantom. Take a look at this. This kind of blew me away. I can't even believe this. This is the Coral Glow Super Phantom, and the Super Phantom almost completely eliminates the Coral Glow, which I thought was really amazing since the Coral Glow is really visually dominant. And I actually pulled up one more at the end here. Take a look at this. This is kind of an interesting effect. fact, this is the Super Phantom Banana with the addition of spider. So the banana is essentially the same thing as the Coral Glow, the banana slash Coral Glow, which is really visually dominant, but it's completely, kind of almost completely eliminated by the Super Phantom. And then when you add the spider, it actually brings out the spider and the Coral Glow at the same time, which is kind of an interesting effect. And I've seen this quite a few times with different combinations. For example, if you actually look at the Super Yellow Belly, which is also called the Ivory, it's an all-white snake, and a lot of times with that all-white snake, it completely masks all other genes, except I'd say maybe there's two genes that really can break through the ivory, and that is the leopard and the Anchi. I'd say to the Anchi to a lesser degree, but definitely the leopard. So if you actually add leopard to an ivory, you get a really strong leopard pattern coming out of the ivory, kind of breaking through, almost like the spider is breaking through the Super Phantom here. And a lot of times when you add other genes to that combination, the leopard will also draw out the other genes with it. So I think it's pretty awesome that you're actually kind of seeing the same thing here. When you add the spider, it's kind of drawing out the Coral Glow banana as far as the pattern and the color. Pretty awesome. All right, so it is time for the question of the day. And Paul Thomas asks, do you know how to identify different head stamps in ball pythons? And that is a very good question. So since when we're talking about head stamps, we're talking about the different patterns on the head of ball pythons. And there are a few genes that have really strong patterns on the head. For example, there's the spot nose and the spider. As a matter of fact, a lot of people that work with the spot nose and the spider, when they breed them to other combinations, a lot of times they can see the changes in the patterns on the head, the changes in the head stamp based on which genes that is in the mix. And sometimes with really complicated mixtures of genes where you really can't pick out the genes, sometimes you can look at the head stamp and kind of figure out one from another. And let me tell you, that is kind of an acquired art, reading the head stamps on ball pythons. And unless you really work with spiders or spot noses or some of the genes that make really strong head stamps, I'd say it's pretty difficult to be really good with the head stamps in general. I suppose what you could do is you could probably go over to Morphmarket and look at all the different combinations and maybe, you know, study it for a while and see if you can kind of get up to speed on all the different head stamps and the combinations. Some people I've seen that are really good at looking at different combinations, kind of distinguishing what genes are in the mix based on the head stamp. But let me tell you, I'm not really at that point. I don't really work a lot with spider, and I don't have spot nose in my collection. I don't have a whole lot of head stamp experience as far as breeding ball pythons. So that is pretty much it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.